The storm raged around me. But it was nothing compared to the storm inside my chest. You're not my daughter anymore. Get out, my father bellowed, his face red with fury, standing firm in the doorway of the house I once called home. Rain lashed against my skin as I dropped to my knees, my suitcase already soaked. I hadn't stolen $5 million from the family business. Someone had framed me, but he wouldn't hear it. Dad, please, I begged, voice raw, but his eyes were already dead to me. Behind him, my stepmother Janice stood smug, clutching my late mother's wedding ring between her fingers. She threw it at me like trash, the metal slicing across my forehead. Blood and rain mingled as I struggled to stand, only for my half-brother Chase to kick me in the ribs. Spitting, thief. I could see my aunt and sister watching from the porch like silent witnesses to my execution. With one final shove, I was pushed into the street. The gates closed, not just to the house, but to my entire past. That night, I wandered the streets with nothing but a waterlogged suitcase and a broken heart. I took shelter under a gas station awning, trading my last few dollars for a cup of bitter coffee and a stale donut. All I had left was my mother's ring, now clutched tightly in my hand. The next few weeks blurred into a cycle of desperation, sleeping in a bug-infested apartment, working double shifts at a dingy diner, enduring leers and insults just to afford food. I was hungry, bruised, and alone. One night, after narrowly escaping an assault from a stranger offering easy money, I hid in a dumpster for hours, shaking and terrified. That was when I met Jack. He was a former Wall Street trader, now rebuilding his life after his own downfall. He saw something in me, a spark worth saving. "You've got grit," he said, offering me a chance to learn the stock market. I took it. I had nothing to lose. Day by day, I clawed my way up, learning, trading, risking. Jack and I scraped together our first win. Then another, and another. Years passed. I built a company with my name on it. Karen Gray, CEO of $1 million firm. But I never forgot. Not the mud, not the blood, not the betrayal. They thought they'd buried me. They were wrong. I wasn't broken. I was forged. And now, it was my turn. My father, Janice, Chase, they were all about to learn what it meant to throw someone away who refused to stay down. I stood before the city skyline, whiskey in hand, the storm long behind me. It was time for theirs to begin. 10 years ago, they threw me into the storm with nothing but lies, betrayal, and a soaked suitcase. Today, I walked into the Carter Industries boardroom in a tailored black suit, my heels echoing across the marble like a drumbeat of vengeance. My name is Karen Gray, and I came to take back everything they stole from me. Ethan Carter sat at the head of the table, laughing, confident, oblivious to the fact that the woman across from him, once kicked out of his mansion, called a thief, and left for dead, was now the majority shareholder in his father's empire. When the chairman called for motions, I stood without hesitation. I moved to remove Ethan Carter as CEO, effective immediately. Silence fell like a guillotine. His eyes locked onto mine. "Who the hell are you?" he snarled. I smiled. "I'm the nightmare you created." He never saw it coming. For years, Jack and I worked in the shadows. Jack, the man who once found me bloodied and cold behind a gas station and taught me how to turn pain into profit. Together, we built an empire from the ground up, trading stocks, flipping companies, and outsmarting the same kind of people who once called me worthless. Now, we were sharks, and I was circling. Ethan's world unraveled in days. The footage of him hiring men to deal with me hit the internet like wildfire. Within hours, the police dragged him out in cuffs. Fraud, conspiracy, attempted murder, no parole. But I wasn't done. This wasn't just about Ethan. I wanted them all, Susan, Vivian, and most of all, my father, the man who once said I wasn't his daughter, who threw my mother's ring at my face and watched as I was kicked out like garbage. They thought I'd vanish. Instead, I rose. I wasn't just rebuilding, I was reclaiming. Now, as I looked down at the city lights from my penthouse office, the very building where they once denied me everything, I saw only the future. A future they could never take from me again. I had turned every scar into strategy, every tear into triumph. This wasn't revenge for the sake of anger, it was justice long overdue. And with Ethan gone, it was time to move on to the next name on my list. I turned to Jack, standing at the window with that quiet strength he always carried. Ready for phase 2? I asked. He nodded, lifting his glass. Let's finish what we started. The ballroom gleamed with crystal chandeliers and expensive floral arrangements. But all I could see was the name tag in my hand. Karen, housekeeper. Vanessa had smirked as she handed it to me, her eyes dancing with cruelty. Laughter rippled around me, soft but sharp, each chuckle a little knife. There was no plate at my seat. No name on the seating chart. To them, I didn't exist. I was the wife of Robert Gray. Yet in his family's eyes, I was still an outsider. Carol, my ever-condescending mother-in-law, sipped her wine with smug satisfaction. Vanessa, the spoiled sister-in-law, preened like a queen on her wedding day, expecting me to slink away humiliated. But what they didn't know, what they'd never imagined, was that I had seen this coming. And I came prepared. For 6 months, I had gathered evidence, financial records, hidden transactions, and the affair Vanessa thought she'd hidden so well. I'd hired a private investigator. I'd collected screenshots, receipts, messages. I'd met discreetly with Michael's mother, Eleanor, and handed her a neat folder. The moment she flipped through those pages, I saw the fire light in her eyes. Tonight wasn't going to be their victory. It would be their unraveling. I calmly pinned the name tag to my dress and smiled. I raised my champagne glass to Carol, who blinked, suddenly uncertain. You're right, I said softly. Maybe I should act the part. Vanessa's smirk faltered. She hadn't expected composure. She hadn't expected power. But that's exactly what I held. At the height of their arrogance, they never thought the woman they dismissed would be the one to bring them down. When the whispers began to ripple through the room, Michael's pale face staring at the photos, Eleanor rising with icy fury, the hotel manager whispering to Carol about unpaid balances, it was everything I had planned. The wedding collapsed, the lies burned, and Carol's empire, built on manipulation and money that wasn't hers, began to crumble. I had spent years biting my tongue, enduring their mockery, but tonight, I watched them unravel under the very lights they installed to shine on their own success. And as I stood at the edge of that ballroom, watching Vanessa break and Carol rage, I didn't feel revenge, I felt release. I turned and walked away. Finally free. They had underestimated the quiet one. But they wouldn't make that mistake again. The rain fell in sheets as I stood at the edge of the driveway, soaking wet, my suitcase lying in a puddle beside me. You're no longer part of this family. Karen, my father growled, his voice as cold and final as the storm crashing around us. He believed I had stolen $5 million from our family's company, money I had never touched. But the truth didn't matter anymore. Vivian, my stepmother, had made sure of that. She stood behind him with a twisted smile, holding my late mother's wedding ring like a trophy before tossing it at my feet. It hit my forehead, drawing blood that mixed with the rain. My half-brother Ethan shoved me with a boot to the ribs, sneering, "Get out, thief." My Aunt Susan clutched her pearls like I was a curse. No one defended me. No one questioned the lies. They had planned this, every bit of it. I stumbled into the street, clutching the soaked suitcase with trembling hands. My life packed in drenched clothes and ruined memories. I had nothing, not even a place to go. That night, I found shelter under the awning of a rundown gas station, trading my last few dollars for a stale donut and a cup of bitter coffee. That was the beginning of a long descent. I waited tables at a greasy diner, scrubbed floors late into the night, slept in a mold-infested apartment I could barely afford. Hunger clawed at me daily. Then one night, desperate and walking home in the rain, a man in a car offered me a job, easy money. When he tried to assault me, I fought back with a rusty pocket knife, left him bleeding, and ran until I collapsed behind a dumpster. A week later, I met Jack, a former stockbroker turned ghost in the system. He saw something in me. Not pity, potential. Together, we clawed our way back. Jack taught me how to read the market, how to invest, how to win. We made our first trade on a failing tech company and doubled our money. Then we did it again. And again. In 2 years, we had built a small empire, my name on the company, my hands on the wheel. 10 years later, I had wealth, power, and control. But most of all, I had clarity. They had cast me out, left me to drown, but I had turned that betrayal into fuel. Now, it was time for Vivian, Ethan, and Susan to see what became of the girl they tossed into the storm. They had destroyed my life, but they forgot one thing. I knew how to rebuild. And I was no longer the naive daughter begging to be heard. I was Karen Gray, and I was coming back, not for forgiveness, but for justice. A year had passed since the night I was thrown out like trash, betrayed, humiliated, and left to fend for myself. But now, I stood at the helm of my own financial firm. A name they whispered with awe and fear, Gray Capital. Founded by Karen Gray, the girl they tried to bury. I had turned pain into power, scars into strategy, and today marked the first move in my long-awaited revenge. Susan and Ethan were my first targets, two of the main players in the lie that destroyed me. Susan, my aunt, who faked the financial records to frame me. Ethan, my half-brother, who kicked me to the curb and took my rightful place as CEO of Carter Industries. But they had no idea that for the past several years, I'd been watching, waiting, buying shares in the company they stole, through anonymous corporations and proxy investors. I owned more than they knew, and I was ready to use it. I started with Susan. She'd always been superstitious, obsessed with rituals, trinkets, and omens. I used that. I had someone send her copies of the forged ledgers with notes written in red ink. Your blood will pay. Then came the phone calls in the dead of night. Can you hear Evelyn's voice yet? A low whisper. Then silence. I paid a psychic, a fake one, to confirm her fears. A spirit is tied to your money. He told her, you must surrender it. And she did. Susan signed over every dollar she had. Terrified she'd be cursed. I took it all, her savings, her comfort, her sanity. She withdrew from the world. Holed up in her house, mumbling about shadows and ghosts. That was my justice. Silent, psychological, permanent. Then came Ethan. He thought he was invincible, parading around like the king of the empire he stole. But I had the power now. At the annual shareholder meeting, I stood up and removed him as CEO. The boardroom fell silent. He shouted, "Who the hell are you?" I met his eyes without flinching. "I'm the nightmare you created." The vote passed. He was out, furious. Ethan tried to silence me the only way he knew, violence. He sent 2 men after me. Thugs with a knife and no conscience. But I fought back. I escaped. And I got the proof. One of them flipped. Confessed on video that Ethan had paid him to kill me. I released it to the press. He was arrested within hours. The man who kicked me out into the rain was now locked behind bars, facing a lifetime of it. I watched the news that night with Jack at my side. Susan was broken. Ethan was imprisoned. And me? I was just getting started. Vivian and my father were next. They thought I was gone. But I was never gone. I was building an empire while they slept, an empire built on their lies and my vengeance. And now, one by one, I'd make sure they all fell. After years of silence, I finally stood outside the retirement home where the man who once called himself my father now lived. Weak, alone, forgotten. 10 years ago, he was the one who had tossed me into the storm with nothing but a soaked suitcase and a bleeding forehead. Today, the power had shifted. Vivian was gone, rotting in prison for fraud and conspiracy. Ethan was serving life for attempted murder. Susan, a ghost of herself, mumbling about curses and shadows. And now it was my father's turn, the last remaining thread of the web that once strangled me. When I walked into his tiny room, he looked up from the blank TV screen, confusion clouding his eyes. It took him a second to recognize me. "Karen?" His voice cracked, thin as paper. He looked like time had chewed him up and spit him out. No mansion, no authority, just a sad old man and the ghosts of his decisions. "I messed up, kid," he croaked, trying to stand. "I'm sorry." I didn't move, just crossed my arms and stared. "You picked them over me," I said quietly. "Where are they now?" His shoulders slumped like the words hit harder than a punch. I tossed a ripped photo onto his lap, the one of the 3 of us from before Mom died. I'd kept it for years. Now it was a relic I no longer needed. His hands trembled as he held it. Then, something unexpected, a letter. Crumpled and yellowed, tucked away in his drawer. It was addressed to me. Dated a week after the night he threw me out. I shouldn't have believed her. I was wrong. Come home. My chest tightened. He had tried, but Vivian had intercepted it. She'd wanted me gone, and he was too weak to stop her. That was the truth. He wasn't evil, just spineless. He started to cry, whispering that he was sorry, that he tried, that he should have protected me. I looked at him for a long moment, then pulled a check from my coat pocket. Here, I said, placing it gently on the table. 5,000, should cover your care for a while. It wasn't forgiveness, it was closure. He reached for me as I turned away. Please, don't go. But I kept walking, because I had already gone. The day he threw me out was the day I stopped being his daughter. Jack was waiting in the truck when I got outside. The sky was clear, the air, light. I climbed in without a word. My father died a few months later, alone. His obituary barely filled a paragraph in the paper. No funeral, no legacy, just silence. And as I read that notice, I felt nothing but peace. Not because I hated him, but because I no longer needed him. I had built a life without the people who broke me. And now, I was finally free. One of the most powerful lessons drawn from this story is that strength is often found in silence and in preparation. In a world where cruelty can be cloaked in politeness and manipulation often hides behind smiles, it's easy to underestimate those who quietly endure. But enduring doesn't mean accepting. The story reminds us that dignity, once bruised, can be rebuilt into something unshakable with patience, evidence, and resolve. For an older audience, this tale speaks to the wisdom of timing, the importance of watching rather than reacting, and the unmatched power of truth when it's revealed at the right moment. It also highlights how family ties, while sacred, should never excuse betrayal or abuse. And perhaps the most sobering message is this: the people who love you will show it, not just when it's easy, but when it's hard, messy, and unpopular. If they don't, you have every right to walk away. Healing doesn't always look like forgiveness. Sometimes it looks like building a new life, stronger, quieter, and finally, free.